A child dies for a few minutes and returns with a surprising revelation. Heaven is nothing like what you learned in churches. In this video, you will learn about one of the most impactful and spiritually provocative stories of recent times. Prepare yourself for an experience that challenges beliefs, awakens faith, and brings to light deep mysteries about life after death. What this child saw could change the way he prays, believes, and sees God. This message found you because your soul is ready to remember. Here, each story is alive, full of faith and purpose. Leave your like so that more people are reached by this light, and subscribe with the bell activated. The next revelations can transform much more than your day. Mila, only 6 years old, has always been a sensitive child, one of those who look deep into your eyes and seem to see something beyond. A resident of Salem, Oregon, in the United States, she lived with her parents in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by the affection of her family and the simple routine of someone who was still discovering the world. The days were filled with laughter, prayers before meals, and Bible stories read carefully by his father, always before bed. From a young age, she demonstrated a spontaneous faith, the kind that didn't need to be forced. When he saw a cross, he closed his eyes. When someone was hurt, he said, "Let's pray for him." It was a pure reflection of the home where he grew up. On Sundays, the family attended the community church. Mila loved singing at children's services and listened attentively to each story about heaven, angels, Jesus, and the promises of eternity. He asked things like, "Is there a school in heaven?" Or, "Do the people there sleep too?" The parents smiled tenderly at these doubts. These were common questions from a child learning to love God in their own way, with the curiosity appropriate to their age. She believed in everything with a beautiful, unfiltered faith. But none of those questions would compare to what came next. On a warm spring afternoon, while playing in the yard with her favorite doll, Mila suffered a domestic accident. A simple slip near the pool turned a sunny day into a nightmare. The fall was bad, and the impact on her head made her lose consciousness immediately. In seconds, the lightness of childhood gave way to despair. The mother ran. The father tried to revive her right there, while neighbors called the emergency services. There were moments of pure panic, screams interspersed with desperate prayers. Faith at that moment stopped being a theory and became a cry. "Lord, save our daughter, please." The ambulance didn't take long to arrive. The paramedics acted quickly, but they knew every second was crucial. Mila was rushed to Salem Children's Hospital as her parents accompanied her, hands shaking, eyes teary, trying to understand what was happening. And it was during that journey, between life and death, that the unexpected happened. When she arrived at the emergency room, she was unconscious. The heartbeats were irregular, breathing weak. And then, at what doctors call a critical moment, the heart monitor showed a flat line. Cardiac arrest. For approximately 4 minutes, Mila was considered clinically dead. 4 minutes. It may seem like a short time, but for the parents waiting outside the room, it was like a suspended eternity. A time where the world stopped, where the ground seemed to have disappeared beneath your feet. The doctors moved with precision, trying to revive her. And outside, the father, kneeling on the cold hospital floor, murmured Psalm 23 in a choked voice, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." The mother, almost without strength, just repeated the name of Jesus between sobs. "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." It was in this environment, between human pain and divine hope, that something happened to Mila. But it's important that you understand. In that cold room, full of devices, people running, cables connected to the fragile body of a 6-year-old girl, something bigger was moving. A purpose was being woven. A sacred silence hovered between the missing beats and the rising prayers. And then, suddenly, when the doctors were already thinking about the worst, a small miracle. The monitor beeped. The heart started beating again. Air filled the lungs. Mila, against all expectations, came back to life. But the most impressive thing was not just the return. That's what happened in the next few seconds. Still with her eyes closed, with the wires connected to her body and her face pale, Mila murmured something, weak but audible. A sentence that would leave everyone in the room motionless. "This is not the heaven the teacher told us about." The nurse, who was monitoring the blood pressure, was paralyzed. The doctor stared at the display. And the mother, hearing this as she entered the room, felt an electric current run down her spine. It was as if the child had just woken up from a dream, or something much bigger than a dream. And at that moment, no one could speak anymore. Just listen. Mila's gaze was deep, far from that innocent glow he used to have. There was something different there, something that didn't suit a newly reanimated child. It was as if she had come back from somewhere, a place she couldn't describe with simple words. The room was filled with an eerie, reverent silence, as if even the walls knew something extraordinary was unfolding. And that's how it all started. Mila was still lying down, her eyes half open, as if part of her hadn't completely returned yet. The room was silent. Not even the equipment dared to break that moment. The father approached carefully, still not knowing if he could speak, and the mother held her daughter's hand so gently that she seemed afraid she might disappear again. The nurse, attentive, kept her eyes on the monitor, but the real attention was there, on that girl who had just returned from death with something in her eyes that no one could explain. In the following days, as Mila recovered physically, her mind seemed filled with memories that went far beyond what was understandable. She spoke little, but when she did, each word seemed loaded with meaning, a gentle weight, as if they were not just childish words, but fragments of something bigger, deeper. Parents began to record their speeches. They didn't want to miss any details. They knew deep down that they were facing something sacred, something that was not of this world. Mila said that at the moment everything went dark, she felt no pain. He didn't feel afraid. It was as if something very light had been released from within her. It was like taking off a tight dress, he explained. And then suddenly, she found herself floating. At the top of the room, I saw everything, but in a different way. Doctors running, the mother crying. Her father leaned against the wall, whispering prayers she had never heard before. The nurse with shaking hands, and her own body, down there, motionless. It was strange, but it wasn't scary. I knew it was me, but I no longer needed that body to exist, he said. This simple description, spoken with the purity of a child, deeply touched the parents. How could a 6-year-old girl so calmly explain something so mystical? How could I describe the sensation of out-of-body consciousness in such detail? And more, how could I know what was being said there, at that moment when she had no pulse or breathing? But there was more. She said that while floating, she began to be pulled by a light. It wasn't an ordinary light, the kind you see when lighting a dark room. It was alive. It pulsed. It was like it had a heart, she said. This light enveloped her in a way that she couldn't explain in words, but she tried. It felt like music that embraced you. It was then that, surrounded by this living light, Mila felt that she was going somewhere else. A place unlike anything I had ever seen, dreamed of, or heard about. It was not heaven as shown in the Bible school drawings, nor as the pastor described it in the service. There were no golden gates. There were no streets of gold. There was no choir of angels. At least, not at that first moment. What she saw was something that looked alive. Everything there vibrated. Everything moved, but at the same time it was stable. There was a soft atmosphere, with colors that changed according to feelings. When I was happy, the sky turned pink. When I thought about Mom, it turned blue. When I thought about God, it turned white and warm. These phrases, written down by parents in a simple notebook, became a treasure. Each of them brought an additional layer of mystery and also of hope. After all, what could this place be where feelings change the colors of the sky? Where is love a visible vibration? Where even silence speaks? Mila reported that she could not walk, but that she moved with her thoughts. All she had to do was wish she were somewhere, and in an instant she was. He said there was no time as we know it here. There were no clocks, no rush. Everything happened as if time was no longer necessary. And at the same time, it all made sense. It was as if his soul understood things that his brain was not yet able to decipher. What was most impressive was the way she talked about it all, without trying to impress, without trying to convince, just counting. As if he were describing a game on the school playground. But it was impossible not to feel the weight of those words, the weight of truth, even if it cannot be proven with logic. At one point she said she heard thoughts, not with the ears, but with the heart. He said that everything in that place spoke, the colors, the sounds, even the wind. I knew what things wanted to tell me. It was as if everything there had a soul. When asked what she heard, she responded with something that made everyone silent. Love said I could stay, but the truth said I needed to go back. This is where the story begins to change tone, because until then, everything seemed like a beautiful, comforting experience. But Mila's expressions began to reveal another layer, something deeper, more serious. She was silent for several minutes. He seemed to be trying to remember, but at the same time, he seemed to ponder whether he should say it, until he said, "Not everything was light, not everything was beautiful. There were places I didn't want to go." But she stopped there. The parents respected silence. They didn't insist. They just wrote it down. They knew that forcing could make her close down. And they didn't want to lose the connection they were building with that part of her that perhaps was still trying to understand what she had experienced. In other conversations, Mila said she saw things she shouldn't have seen, but he didn't explain. He just looked at the ground, hugged his mother and asked, "Can you pray with me now?" The mother cried. He didn't respond with words. He just held the little girl in his arms and began to pray like never before. And at that moment, it wasn't someone's prayer asking for healing. It was the prayer of someone who felt that their daughter had touched something so deep, so spiritual, that only the presence of God could embrace and protect. Days later, Mila started drawing. Not dolls, not landscapes. I drew different shapes, spirals, fields with bright dots. One day, he drew something he called the place for questions. When asked, she explained, "It's where we go when we have doubts. There we understand everything, but we can only go when our hearts are clean." A sentence like that, said so calmly, even moved the pastor of the local church who asked to talk to her. But that is a part of the story that we have yet to get to. There is still a lot to be revealed. The important thing now is that you understand the depth of what Mila experienced. What she experienced goes beyond what human eyes can capture. It is a testimony that touches spiritual dimensions. One of those stories that come to remind us that there is more between heaven and earth than our mind can understand. And that's why you're here. Because somehow, your soul also feels that there is something more, something that cannot be ignored, something you don't find in textbooks or memorized sermons, something that only those who lived it, or those who are open to listening, can understand. You got here because something touched your soul. Now give back to the universe with a simple statement of faith. Comment, "I also heard the light." This phrase is our spiritual mark. When many declare, the light responds. Mila kept repeating that what she saw was not as she was told in Sunday school, nor as she heard in church sermons, nor even as children's drawings showed. There was something more, something deeper, more true, more difficult to explain in human words. She didn't speak like a child making up a fantasy. There was no theatrical twinkle in his eyes, no attempt to impress. What came out of his mouth came with a kind of invisible weight, a spiritual density that made the adults around him fall silent, listening not just with their ears, but with their hearts. One night, after a peaceful bath while her mother was combing her hair with the usual care, Mila looked in the mirror and said, "I still feel that voice." The mother, confused, asked, "What voice, daughter?" And Mila replied without taking her eyes off her reflection, "The one who spoke to me when everything was clear. The one who said that heaven is different for each person, that there is no fault there, that there is no punishment, there is only what we need to see." The mother stopped, holding the comb in the air. He didn't say anything, just continued listening. Mila said that this voice was not like a human voice. It didn't come out of a mouth. It was as if the entire universe was speaking to her, but without sound. The message came straight to the feeling, without noise, without a doubt. And what that voice showed her was something that defied everything she had learned until then. She repeated several times, as if trying to fix a truth within herself. There is no religion there. Everyone sees the sky they need to see, and no one is better than the other. The father, quieter, began to observe Mila with different eyes. He wasn't the type to get carried away by emotions easily, but seeing his daughter, just 6 years old, talking about spiritual realities with such depth, reminded him of things he himself had felt as a child and never had the courage to share. He began to believe that perhaps what he had always considered coincidental was actually spiritual. That perhaps the signs you ignored throughout your life were, like now, whispers of something greater trying to awaken you. During one of these conversations, Mila described something that left everyone deeply touched. She spoke of figures of light, beings that approached gently without rushing, and that seemed to be made of living energy. They had no face, no exact shape, but they conveyed strong sensations. There was one that seemed to be made of music. When he got close, I heard a song that made me cry, but it wasn't sad. It was as if he was reminding me of good things that I had forgotten. The mother asked if they were angels, and Mila replied, I think they were, but not like we imagine. They didn't have wings. They flew without flying. These figures, according to Mila, did not rule her. They didn't give orders. They showed. They revealed. And always with love. They pointed out places, moments, and sometimes they just stood next to her in silence as if to say, you are safe. But not everything was light, as Mila herself had started to say in the last few conversations. Cautiously, she began to talk about people who were lost. He said he saw confused souls, people sitting with their heads down, murmuring things they didn't understand, people crying. There were no screams, no physical pain, but there was a sadness that came from within. It seemed like they were stuck in a thought, in a feeling that didn't end, like they couldn't forgive themselves for something. This touched the parents deeply, especially because Mila, even without understanding what regret meant, used exactly that word. Some were sorry, but they still didn't know how to get out of there. She said the light tried to reach them, but they turned their faces away, as if they didn't think they were worth looking at. One of these people, according to her, repeated the phrase, I screwed up. This was engraved in everyone's memory. It was a kind of emotional purgatory, a spiritual state where one's own mind was one's heaven or hell. And this wasn't something Mila learned on television, not even in books. It was something that came from a different place, something she said serenely but which weighed deeply on whoever heard it. The idea that the afterlife is not a court with judges and immediate punishments, but a kind of mirror of the soul, a direct reflection of what we cultivate inside. There, everything is true, she said one afternoon, as she sketched what she called the Hall of Memories. There, no one can hide anything, not even their thoughts. That's why it hurts for some, because they only remember the things they couldn't fix. The mother asked if it was possible to leave this place. Mila nodded and explained, the light waits. The light always waits. And when a person looks at it and says, I want, they start to see everything differently. Then they start to shine too. These phrases, said simply, carried such an intense spiritual density that it was impossible not to be moved. Mila didn't use difficult words. He didn't beat around the bush. It was as if she had become a direct channel with something divine, slowly bringing the truths she saw and felt. And each new line of hers created an almost sacred atmosphere in the house, a respectful silence, a type of reverence that is not imposed, but that arises naturally when faced with something that reason cannot explain, and that the heart simply recognizes. She said that the light did not punish anyone, that there was no eternal punishment, but he also said that the light did not lie, that she showed exactly what the soul needed to see. Some need to see what they've done. Some need to remember the love, and some just need to rest, forget everything for a while. It was the first time she spoke about forgetfulness as a kind of spiritual medicine. The light figures, according to Mila, helped in this process. They guided souls, but not with words, with feeling. They hug from the inside, she said, and when they ring, you remember who you are. And then, after a while of silence, looking at the sky through the window, Mila said, Mommy, God is all of this. He is the light, He is the music, He is the memory, He is even the silence. The mother cried, because in that moment, more than ever, she knew that her daughter had truly come back from a place she couldn't imagine, only feel. That afternoon was especially quiet. The sky in Salem, Oregon had a slightly grayish hue, as if the world itself was respecting the invisible weight of the revelations that were being made. Inside the room, Mila was sitting on the bed, surrounded by her drawings spread across the floor and the bedspread. She seemed distant, with her gaze fixed on an undefined point on the wall. Her mother, accustomed to these moments of introspection since everything happened, didn't interrupt her. She just stayed there, sitting next to her, respecting her daughter's silence, like someone guarding the entrance to a sacred place. After a few minutes like this, Mila looked aside, took a deep breath, and almost without moving her lips said, Mommy, before I came back, I heard something. The mother, immediately alert, came a little closer, but without pressing. Mila held the edge of the quilt between her small fingers, squeezing gently, as if the texture of the fabric helped keep her thoughts organized within her. It was a voice, she continued, the same one that accompanied me when everything was clear. It was closer this time, as if it wanted me to remember even after I woke up. It said, "Tell the adults that they have forgotten what it was like to be pure. The truth is in love, not in fear." The mother felt a chill run through her body. He was breathless for a few seconds. She knew every word of the Bible, every preacher's sermon, every prayer she had said since becoming pregnant with Mila, but nothing had touched her as much as that sentence. It was as if everything had been reduced to a single teaching, simple, powerful, and unquestionable. The truth is in love, not in fear. Mila looked directly into her mother's eyes and repeated, "They forgot what it means to be pure." And then, as if he felt that that phrase carried more than words, he added, "Purity is not about being prim. It's about remembering who we were before we were afraid, before we tried to deserve God's love." These words, spoken with the ease of a child and the authority of someone who has faced an eternal truth, fell on that room like silent thunder. The father, who was at the door, listening silently, leaned his head against the wall and closed his eyes. He was no longer the same man who walked into that hospital weeks ago. Something inside him had been broken, or perhaps rebuilt. In the days that followed, Mila spoke of that voice again at different times, almost always at night, just before going to sleep. She said it was not an order, not a commandment, but a reminder that the voice didn't speak like a king, but like a mother trying to wake her child with affection. And he always repeated, "Tell the adults," as if the mission he was given was not just to remember, but to make them remember. One night, she asked to light a candle. I had never asked for this before. She stared at the flame for long minutes without blinking, and then he said, "This is how God speaks, without noise. But if we don't stop to look, we think the flame is just a light, and we lose the message." Her mother asked if she remembered anything else she heard there, and Mila nodded. After a few seconds, he said, "They told me that fear has hardened people's hearts, that many talk about God, but forget to feel Him, and that the fear of making mistakes is turning people away from the light." She began to quote other phrases, short but so profound that they seemed carved from the Spirit. Phrases like, "God doesn't want you to deserve it, He wants you to accept it. Love that judges is fear in disguise. The truth doesn't scream, it whispers. That's why few listen." These messages always came in moments of calm, as if the surrounding atmosphere was preparing for Mila to remember. And when she spoke, everyone around her fell silent, including her older brothers, who before didn't really know how to react to the things she said, but now they simply sat next to her in silence. During one of these late-night conversations, Mila revealed something that left her parents even more intrigued. She said that, when saying goodbye to that place of light, before returning to her body, she felt a different type of energy, as if something big was about to happen. She didn't know how to explain it in words. She just said that she felt a movement in the air, something that was coming to wake people up, something that would make many remember things they had forgotten. "There will be people dreaming about things similar to me," she said, "and others will start to feel like they need to change, without even knowing why." This phrase was bouncing around in parents' minds for days. They began to pay more attention to the world around them. Friends who were more sensitive, people telling strange dreams, neighbors saying they felt a sudden need to reconnect with God. Too many coincidences to ignore. The family then began to record everything, not just the reports, but also the feelings, the subtle details, the gestures, the silences. They created a notebook they called Mila's Souvenirs, where they wrote down each of the messages she said she had received. The idea was not to transform that into a doctrine, nor into a rule, but in seed, in something that could be reread in moments when fear wanted to take the place of love. And this was perhaps the part most repeated by Mila. Don't let fear speak louder than love. She said this was the soul's biggest trap. That fear made people turn away from God even when they were trying to get close to Him. It's fear that makes someone think that God won't listen, that He won't forgive, that He won't want. And then she added, almost like a whisper, "But God, He never stopped listening. It's us who stopped listening." These words changed the way the family prayed. From that moment on, prayers became simpler, more true. There were no more desperate requests or impossible promises. There was presence, there was gratitude, there was silence. Because, as Mila taught, sometimes silence is also prayer. After that day, nothing was the same again. Mila's family's daily life, which was previously marked by simple routines, breakfast with bread and milk, cartoons on television, prayers before bed, began to transform into something different. It was as if time had slowed down inside that house, as if every gesture, every silence, every sentence spoken spontaneously by Mila had become sacred. Everything started to be looked at more carefully, and not out of fear, but out of respect, out of reverence. As if everyone there was aware that something deep, something spiritual had been touched, and that now demanded care, listening, presence. The father, who previously barely participated in conversations about faith, was now the first to sit on the sofa to listen to Mila tell her impressions of the day. Sometimes she said loose sentences, other times she asked questions that seemed to come from someone much older. One day, out of the blue, she looked at her father and asked, "Have you ever asked yourself what you came to learn in this life?" The man stopped. It was silent for long seconds. It wasn't a common question coming from a child, but since her near-death experience, Mila was no longer ordinary. She had brought something back, something that could not be seen, but that was felt. The mother, in turn, began to record everything with even more discipline. I wrote down not only what Mila said, but the context, the time, the weather, and over time he noticed patterns. The days when Mila woke up more reflective usually coincided with intense dreams, with atmospheres that seemed different. On some occasions, she would wake up silently, walk out to the backyard and just stare at the sky for entire minutes. One day, when asked, she replied, "I feel like there's something coming. Not here, but in people. A desire to change, to remember, to love again." The questions that Mila asked, now more frequently, also became a source of reflection for the family. One morning, over coffee, she asked her mother, "If love is the most important thing there is, why do people hide it all the time?" On another occasion, he asked, "If God is within us, why do so many people look for him outside?" And one night before going to sleep, he said quietly, "I think we have forgotten how to talk to him without words." These questions, said with simplicity and purity, provoked dialogues that the family had never had before. The dining table became an altar. The sofa became a temple. Time together became more than just coexistence. It became communion. What was once a routine has become a ritual. What was once an obligation became a delivery. Even the grandparents, who initially reacted with skepticism, began to visit the house more frequently. They said they felt something different in the air. "Dad's like it's lighter here," Grandma once commented, as if there was a peace that you can't explain. And Mila, listening from the other room, replied out loud, "It's because here we really remember God." The impact went beyond the house. At school, teachers began to notice changes. Mila no longer fit into the common mold. It was as if his mind was on another level, not in the intellectual sense, but spiritually. While other children talked about drawings and games, Mila liked to talk about the soul, about what happens after the body turns off, as she said. A teacher once commented to the principal, "That girl has the look of someone who has seen the invisible." And that was exactly it. But perhaps the most sensitive point, and also the most revealing, was how Mila started to see other people. She started paying more attention to other people's pain. "I cried when I saw someone sad." He touched his colleagues' shoulders with an almost angelic delicacy when he realized they were going through something. In a group activity, he saw a silent classmate, far away, and went towards her. He just held her hand for a few seconds and said, "You're not alone, I heard that the other day, it was for you." The teacher, upon witnessing this, could not contain her tears. Mila's sensitivity has increased to the point where she can no longer watch certain television programs. He said that there were things that hurt the eyes of the soul. He began to choose the cartoons he watched with discretion. Avoid loud noises, arguments, busy environments. It was as if his soul had become even more permeable, as if his connection with the spiritual now directly influenced his presence in the physical. When they asked how she knew all that, she smiled sweetly and said, "I don't know. I just feel it." The family's routine was adjusted to this new rhythm. Meals now always began with moments of silence, not a memorized prayer but a real pause and inner listening. The television, previously on all the time, now remains off for most of the day. The conversations got deeper. Time with Mila came to be valued as a divine gift, and all of this transformed not only the home, but also the soul of each person. The father, who previously no longer attended church, prayed again, but now he prayed in a different way, without many words, without formulas. He would just sit in the corner of the room, close his eyes and say, "Lord, I am here." And he cried, not out of sadness, but because he had rediscovered a type of faith that he didn't even know he had lost. Mom started writing a personal diary. In it, he talked about how he felt about the changes, how moved he was by Mila's questions, how she felt challenged to live more truthfully. She wrote on one of the pages, "My daughter came back from the dead with a mission, and I think part of that is to remind us how to truly live." Even the neighbors started to notice something different. A man who has lived on the same street for over 30 years commented one afternoon, "There's a good energy in that house, we can feel it even from far away." And when his mother told him the reason, he responded with just an emotional look and promised that he would start praying again after years away. The impact of Mila's experience was not just spiritual, it was emotional, familial, relational. It transformed perspectives, opened paths, it gave new meaning to memories, brought healing. But above all, he woke up. He awakened sleeping hearts. And it is this awakening that continues to echo day after day in that simple house in Salem. And now that you've come this far, listening carefully to every word, feeling every fragment of this story that is not just about a child, but about what exists beyond what the eyes can see, I need to ask you a question. And it's not just any question. It's one of those things that can't be responded to quickly, those that stop time for a few seconds inside your heart. And you, do you believe that heaven can be different from what you have always been taught? Can you imagine that the afterlife is not a fixed place, with golden walls, gates, and judgment, but rather a state of the soul, a deep reflection of what we cultivate inside, that maybe heaven is not a destination, but a memory we forget, a vibration, a spiritual place shaped by our own consciousness and purity of intention? Do you believe that God, the God who created the universe, time, mysteries, and details, could be simpler and more loving than we can understand? That he does not await us with condemnation, but with an invitation to remember? These questions are not rhetorical. They are seeds, seeds of reflection, seeds that only blossom when they are taken into the heart and left there for a while, until they begin to sprout. And perhaps, upon hearing this story, upon feeling this energy that goes far beyond words spoken on video, you felt a calling, a whisper that only you heard. A strange feeling of familiarity, as if something inside you had known this truth for a long time, but had forgotten. Mila, with her light voice, her still childish eyes, and a soul that touched the invisible, did not come to bring ready answers. She didn't come back from her near-death experience a teacher or a sage. She returned as a messenger, a bridge between two worlds, bringing from there not rules, dogmas, or threats, but reminders of heaven. Reminders that purity is not in not making mistakes, but in loving truthfully. Reminders that the light always awaits us, even when we hide from it. Reminders that life goes on, and that it is much more than what our eyes can see. And maybe now you're remembering something too. Perhaps you felt this in an old prayer, in a presence that embraced you in silence. Once he narrowly escaped death. Or one of those nights when you woke up with your heart racing, feeling that someone on the other side wanted to tell you something. Maybe you experienced something that you didn't tell anyone about. A spiritual experience, a feeling, an encounter with something invisible. Something that science has not explained but that your spirit understood. Something that still haunts you in silence, waiting to be shared. Getting this far already reveals that something inside you has been touched in a profound way. There is a moment when the soul recognizes the truth, even without understanding everything with the mind. And when that happens, there's no way to ignore it. The transformation begins silently but real. Today, something was activated. A call to remembrance, to living faith, to hope that heals from within. And every true transformation begins with a gesture. Then, in the comments, write a phrase that seals this awakening with intention and surrender. I am ready to remember. These words carry a vibration that goes beyond the screen. When written from the heart, they move the invisible. And from that moment on, something starts to align. The answer is already on the way. When something truly touches your soul, the next step is natural. Continue the journey. Here, each story is not just told, it is felt, lived, and transformative. By signing up now and activating the bell, you're giving back to what has already started to move within you. This isn't just a channel, It's a sacred space of experiences that awaken your faith, rekindle your spiritual memory, and strengthen your connection to the divine. Getting this far already shows that this message has found space in your heart. By leaving your like now, you not only confirm that you were touched, you give back what you received and help this light reach other people who, like you, also need to awaken, find faith, and find hope again. When a soul is touched, it transforms others. A new video is already appearing on your screen, and the next revelation has the power to shake up everything you believe even more. Every detail carries something that cannot be ignored. Prepare your heart, because what comes next will make you see things with different eyes. Click now and continue that journey. There's something waiting for you there.